and I walked straight in the Marines. Like, I'm this tiny little skate rat thing, and I walked in and I said, sign me up. My name is Zachary Sales. I am a United States Marine Corps veteran. I served from December 1st, 2009 to October 16th, 2017. I went in as a 0612. Originally it was called a field wireman when I first came in. And then it transitioned into tactical switchboard operator. And then I got out as an 0671, which is like systems administration or something. I forget. I was born in Lincoln, Nebraska in 1990. I grew up in a town about 30 minutes south of that called Beatrice, Nebraska, up until I was about 6 or 7. And then from 6, 7 to 14, mostly Carlsbad, New Mexico. There was a little bit in Texas, a little bit in Virginia, a little bit in Missouri, kind of all over the place. Very crazy childhood. And then from when I was 14, I moved back to Nebraska, my hometown Beatrice. And then from 14 to 18, I finished high school there. And then when I was 19, I left to join the Marines. My childhood was kind of crazy. I probably went to 14 or 15 different schools from kindergarten to high school. When I tell people that, they're like, oh, are you a military brat? And I'm like, well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that my father is a veteran. No, in the sense that I didn't meet my father until I was 14. We were very, very, very poor growing up. And it's a long story, but we would get evicted from like another place like every other week or whatever for not paying the rent. When I was younger, my mother was like a pretty abusive alcoholic. That was more like kindergarten, first grade. Eventually she kicked that and then started chain smoking instead. But basically my whole childhood, she had like a series of like abusive boyfriends and stuff. So much so that in kindergarten, I remember in kindergarten specifically, so I have, I have a lot of siblings, but I grew up with my mother and my father, like I said earlier, is a veteran. So my father, my whole childhood up until I was 14 was in jail, prison, and the brig in the military, like whatever combination, I don't know, but he was gone until I was 14. And so I live with my mother. My mother has 2 other kids. My older sister is my only full-blooded sibling, and then I have a younger brother on my mom's side. My sister's name is Steph. My brother's name is Nick. And so in kindergarten, and this is like the first like early memory of like when all like the abuse and all the other crazy stuff started, was in kindergarten. I remember my brother and I shared a room. We shared a bunk bed. And I remember one night, my mother was dating this guy, or she had a fiance named Scott whatever. I was laying in bed and I was trying to get my brother's attention because I couldn't sleep. And I don't remember what it was. I'm, 4, 5, 6 years old, whatever it is at the time. And I'm trying to get his attention, and I'm like, Nick, wake. I'm like, Nick, are you awake? Nick, are you awake? Nick, are you awake? And my mother's fiance at the time comes in and beat the living shit out of us for just being awake, just for not being asleep. And, we're little kids. And my brother is dead asleep. I'm on top of my bunk. He goes into the bathroom, runs his hand under the water to like, make it like sting more when he like, so he runs his hand under the water. And this is a big dude, runs his hand underwater and then pulls down our pants like bare ass and like spanks us. And my brother was sleeping. He wasn't even awake at the time. So this dude just starts like beating the shit out of my brother with like a wet hand, bare ass. My brother's dead asleep. And I remember that this is just like the starting point of like, years of abuse from her boyfriends and other people. But in kindergarten, the next day or one of the following days, I remember going to school. Well, I don't really remember because my memory's terrible, but this is how my grandmother and my mother and everybody else reiterates it to me. But I have a vague recollection. I went to school and I wouldn't sit down in class, and the teacher sent me to the counselor for not listening. Like, she was like, oh, if you're not going to listen, you need to go to the counselor. And I go to the counselor and they're like, why are you misbehaving? And I was like, it hurts to sit down. And so the counselor like pulls down my pants, and I had like this black and blue like blistered welt of a hand on my ass, at like point where it was like bleeding black, blue all over the place, and I couldn't sit down. And my mother got sent to jail for the summer for child negligence, and then he got sent to jail or whatever for a year or two for child abuse. So that was like kindergarten, first grade. And then around second grade, my mother met this guy, Daniel Plumley, and it was just like, it's kind of a weird thing where like she had like a serial boyfriend of like abusive people. And he was all right at first. Like when you first met him, like he seemed like a nice guy, very normal. And from the time I was, again, like for second grade, basically from second grade to eighth grade, she was with this guy. And he was doing some kind of construction job or something with his father, this older guy named Garland. And so Daniel and his father, Garland, were in Nebraska doing some kind of construction gig. And my mother randomly met this guy and fell in love like immediately, or whatever you want to call it. And basically my mother uprooted my brother, my sister, and I like super sporadically and just moved us down to New Mexico. And those 8 years were pretty traumatizing, at least from like as being a kid. And I look back on it now later and I don't remember a whole lot of it. I always say that my memory is terrible, and I think a lot of that stems from like repressing a lot of stuff as a child. But that dude was very, very, very abusive to my mother, to my sister, to my brother, to myself. The point where it was, I remember, and then my mother was also, she was basically a punching bag for that guy. And I remember my sister would try to like deflect some of the damage. Like if he would go after my brother and I, my sister would like get in the way, and she would antagonize him so that he would purposely like hit her instead of us. And I remember like I have like a few, like, this is like a everyday occurrence, and it didn't start until a year or two into their marriage. Like they were dating for a year, then they got married, and then they were together for 8 years total. And most of the stuff started after like a year. I don't know what flipped the switch, or if it was something he was like suppressing until then, but just like as an example, like I remember one time, like we were like insanely poor to the point where like I literally remember him like rummaging through like a Pizza Hut dumpster, like after they like closed or whatever, to try to like get food for us to eat and like sit in the car. At one point we lived in a van, and like when I said we moved all these places, it's because we would get evicted or we wouldn't be able to pay rent. Like the dude would siphon gas from other people's cars to get car for his van. They would steal people's credit card information so we could stay in hotels. Like the dude was a con, but I was too young to realize it at the time. And eventually like it just progressively got worse, where like it was like, okay, at first he's okay, now he's like conning people out of money and he's hitting us a little bit, and then eventually it progressed to the point where he became very heavily involved in like drugs and stuff. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. So basically we were so poor that I remember one time we weren't allowed to go to the kitchen without permit. We weren't allowed to eat anything in the kitchen without permission, because we literally couldn't afford to like waste food. And I remember one time I went to make a sandwich because I was so hungry, and I made a sandwich and I saw their car pull in the driveway, and I went into the bathroom to like hide in there that I was making a sandwich. And I remember them calling me, and I couldn't finish the sandwich because I'm pretty tiny at the time. And so I tried to hide the rest of the sandwich. I put it in the bottom of a trash can and like stuffed it in there, and they found it, and I got the shit beat out of me for making a sandwich and trying to hide it. Like I got physically assaulted, got my ass beat. They had this wooden, I forgot what it's called, but I remember they had like this wooden, like, it almost looks like a bugle horn, but it was like this thick, it was like this long, and it was either my mother's belt with her name in it, because she liked to see her name on your ass when she's like, oh, that's a reminder. You're like, she would say, I'm gonna leave my name across your ass as a reminder. Yeah. And they had this wooden like bugle horn thing, and it said JC Killing Bat on it. And I don't remember until years later, but I'm pretty sure it stood for like junior correctional, but it said JC Killing Bat, and that's what they would spank us with, or whatever else they had at the time. And that was just for making a sandwich. And then later, like I said, it progressed into like more serious things, to the point where another one, And he started to get like really paranoid. And I remember, this is like another example. I remember, I want to say I'm in like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and he was like tweaked out of his mind on something, and I'm too young to know what is going on because I didn't know anything about drugs. Like I knew that weed existed, I knew I knew about alcohol, but I didn't have any sense of, I had listened to what they said at like Dare, at like the stuff, whatever. So Dare would come to your school and tell you about drugs, and honestly I had no idea what they were talking about half the time. All they would ever talk about is like weed and stuff. And I remember one time, again, we're crazy poor. Like we would eat at soup kitchens, we would beg people for food. My mother would send us around the trailer park to like ask other people for money or ask people for food. Basically, instead of borrow, you should like, oh, can you go ask them if you can borrow $1? We would go to like every single trailer, be like, hey, can I borrow $1? Like a little kid comes and knocks on your door. It's like, how are you gonna say no to like a little kid, asking for $1? And we would do that. And I remember, so we're so poor that, and again, it's progressively gotten worse. And I remember I was so hungry that I went to the cupboard and I grabbed like a handful of saltine crackers to eat something because I was so hungry. And I put the saltine crackers in my pocket to like sneak them into the bathroom so I could eat them. And I remember going in there and, I'm eating my crackers or whatever, putting in my pants, and then don't think anything of it. I put my clothes in the dirty laundry pile, and then day 2, 3 maybe passed, my clothes are still in the dirty clothes pile. And my stepfather, Danny, he comes up to me one day, and he has my pants in his hand. I'm a little kid. This is a grown man, and he has my pants, and he turns them out, and he's like, what the fuck is this? And like the cracker crumbs are coming out, and I'm thinking, fuck, dude, I'm gonna get my ass beat for eating crackers now, like the same way I got my ass beat for making a sandwich. And he goes, what the fuck is this? And I'm like, saltine crackers. And he goes, oh, it's not. He goes, what the fuck is this? And I said, saltine crackers. Like, again, I'm like maybe 10 or 11 years old. And he's like, no, it's not. He's like, I know what this is. And I'm like, saltine crackers. And he's like, no, this is speed. And I didn't even know what that meant. Like, when he was like, speed, I was like, I don't know how that can be speed. Speed is like like running fast or something else. Like, that's one thing as a kid. I'm like, what does he mean, speed? I don't know what he means. And so he has this like saltine cracker crumbs, like, very fine, looks like, powdered. And he's like, this is speed. And he looks at me, and I'm like 10 years old, and he goes, share. I remember very distinctly, he puts out his hand and says, share. Like, he thinks a 10-year-old has speed and he wants them to share.
Wow.
And when I didn't share, again, I got my fucking ass beat. Like, I got spanked, I got hit, the whole 9 yards. And then, of course, I'm confused. I don't understand what speed is. It wasn't until years later, until someone explained it to me, that like I was like, oh, that's why I got my ass beat, because I thought I was just getting my ass beat for eating crackers.
Did he eventually find out it was crackers?
Oh, I have no fucking idea. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. He was strung out. Like, I mean, I can't prove anything, but I remember very specifically his eyes were like fucking popping out of his head, and he like held out his hand, and I remember him, he was like this, share. And yeah, so I got my ass beat pretty severely for that one. And then that was probably like 10 or 11. We weren't allowed to let other people see how we were living, because everyone else was like, fuck. I was like the smelly kid in school. I was the weird kid. Like, my brother and I shared clothes. I'd wear the same pair of the exact same outfit like 5 days in a row. And I remember 14th birthday, my dad sends me a Game Boy Advance SP for my birthday. And I remember my mother and my stepfather coming up to me, and they're like, hey, we want to pawn this. And I didn't know what that meant. I had never been to a pawn shop before. Didn't know what it meant. And I remember them explaining it to me, and they're like, basically they worded it as like pawning without saying pawning. They were like, we want to let a friend is going to pay us to borrow this, and then we're going to pay them to give it back, or something like that. And I didn't really understand what they were talking about, but I was like, well, if you guys, they're like, we need money for groceries, or we need money for this, or something like that. Like, it's going to help your brother and your sister too. And I was like, yeah, sure, as long as I get my games and stuff back. And I remember some time had passed, and I remember walking into a pawn shop, and that's when I kind of clicked in my head. I was walking back home with my best friend at the time, Jose Ruiz, and we walked into this game shop, and I was like, oh, we should look at video games so I can, get some games or whatever whenever I get my Game Boy back. And we go in there, and I see my Game Boy in the fucking case, and I'm like talking to the guy, like, I was like, how much is it for this? I was like, that's mine. It has my initials on it. I was like, if you flip over that game, it'll say ZS right there. And sure enough, it did. And he was like, well, I can't give it to you for free, unfortunately. And I was like, well, it shouldn't be in here. I was like, my mom's friend is supposed to have it. And I swear to God, I can't make this up. I walked back home from school, and I know it wasn't weed because I didn't smell it, but I came back home from school, and I'm assuming it was crack or meth or whatever. And my stepfather, Danny, has a fucking tire iron on the stove with a fucking lighter, and he's lighting something which wasn't weed, so I'm assuming it was some kind of narcotic, and he's just on there fucking getting high with a tire iron on the stove, which I'm assuming was with money from my Game Boy. And yeah, that's kind of how I grew up. Child Protective Services got called like a million times, and they would come over, and everyone would clean the house, and we'd all, fake pretend like everything was okay, hunky-dory. And that kind of went on for, 8 years. And then at some point there was a breaking point. And I remember, like, once I was like old enough to kind of like grasp what was going on and being like, this isn't okay, and I don't want to be near this. I remember I had gotten involved in some like gang stuff, not like anything major, but it was like some like pre-teen like gang stuff in New Mexico, where like I had these friends that lived in the same trailer park with me, and their older brothers were in a gang, and they're like, yeah, once we're a certain age, we can be in their gang. And so we started like our own like mini gang, and we'd like beat the shit out of each other, like jumped each other in. We'd steal from the trailers. We'd fucking throw fucking beer bottles at cars. We'd steal stuff from like the the store, which was called La Tienda. I'd steal stuff from there. I'd steal stuff from the gas station. I'd steal all the stuff, and we'd give it to like the older kids as kind of like a like an offering, like, hey, look at us, we want to be in your gang when we're old enough. And they would just, they'd have us like rob people, and like, or not people specifically, but we'd like rob people's houses, rob people's cars. And then from 14 to 18, started skateboarding and fell in love with it. And that was kind of like my getaway. Like as a kid, my getaway was wrapping myself up in books or just playing outside. And then when I was 14 or 15, and I was able to go hang out with other people, and I was able to do stuff outside of school and hang out with people other than my siblings. I picked up skateboarding in high school, and I've been in love with it ever since. And that was kind of like my my therapy, and it still is to this day. So I graduated May 17th. May 18th, my father went with me to the recruiting stations in Lincoln, Nebraska. They're all in a line on the same block. And the first one on the left is the Marines. And I walked straight in the Marines, have fucking hair down to my shoulders, like skinny as fuck. Like I'm this tiny little skate rat thing. And I walked in and I said, sign me up. And I was 18, and I was in the DEP program, the delayed entry program, from like May to, I didn't leave until December. So what's that, like 7 months? So I waited like 7 months to ship out. And yeah, when I went in the recruiter's office, my dad was with me, and he said, I remember I had just finished reading Generation Kill, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a fucking scout sniper, badass, like this, that, and the other thing. Like, I'm so like gung-ho from like reading all these books and watching all this documentaries and stuff. My dad's like, you can't even fucking swim, dude. Like, you're not going to be special forces. Like, you suck at swimming. And it's like, let alone that. And he looks at the recruiter and he said, and I quote, and again, my dad's like 3'11", so he says, and I quote, fuck that. My only son's not going to be a bullet catcher. And he said, give this kid a job he can do when he gets out of the military. And I attribute a lot of my success to my dad saying that at the time, which there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I love, my infantry brothers. Like, obviously we wouldn't fucking have a military without him. But I am glad that my dad said that, because one, he was right. I fucking suck at swimming. I barely passed swim qual in basic or in boot camp. And then the job thing was kind of weird. I remember I was like, oh, I want to be a combat photographer. I want to be in journalism, because, I'd watched fucking Full Metal Jacket, and I was like, oh, I'll be able to work at a skateboarding magazine when I get out. And then they're like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. You know how recruiters are. They're trying to meet their quotas for whatever. And then a week before I joined, they're like, oh, yeah, we have you down as motor T, like a truck driver. And I was like, no. And they're like, well, that's what you said. And I was like, no, it's not. And they're like, yeah, it is. I was like, dude, how are you going to tell me what I said? I was like, I'm not being a fucking truck driver. no offense to anybody that is, but I was like, that's not for me. Like, I am fucking not mechanically inclined, and I don't want to drive trucks. And they're like, well, you're supposed to leave in a week. And like, do you still want to leave in a week, or do you want to wait like another year? And I was like, I'll leave in a week, but you have to give me something to work with. And they're like going through these, lists. Our recruiters are. They're like, we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this, we have this with a $10,000 bonus. We have this, and I'm like, whoa. I was like, what'd you say about $10,000? And they're like, oh yeah, you just can't have any waivers, and it's in communications. And I'm like, communications like journalism and stuff like that. And he's like, oh yeah, totally. And I was like, well, I don't have any waivers. I was like, oh, what a coincidence. He was like, all right, you leave next week. And so I signed up and joined as an 0612 field wireman, which is basically a guy at the time. It has evolved a lot since then, luckily for me. But it was basically like, here's a phone here, here's a phone here. You run a wire from here to there, and you make the phones talk to each other. And it was like this very basic thing. And that was my first job in the military. And then it evolved into what they call the tactical switchboard operator, which, like the guys in like the old phone booths that are like punching, like patching stuff around. Basically, they had like this new, it was called a Deus and an RSM, deployable end office suite, and a remote subscriber access module. It was like this big, giant, bulky thing. It was like seven green boxes just to make phones talk from here to here. And they had like another more condensed one that was 2 boxes. And I learned how to program those in my schoolhouse in 29 Palms, and that's what I was supposed to do when I got to the fleet. And that's what I did on most of my field operations in my first unit, was just programming those things and making them talk. So my first unit was Marine Air Control Squadron 4 on Marine Corps Air Station Futema in Okinawa, Japan. I was there from 2010 to 2012. So Marine Air Control Squadron 4 is considered, or it was considered when I was in, the most deployed air squadron in the Marine Corps. So basically, the people that work in the, so like an air operating center, there's a tactical version of it, and they have, they have radar, and they have this, that, and the other. And the people that are, controlling flights, and the people that are capturing the birds, the aircraft and stuff, I'm the one that provides communication to them. And so they're, training with the Filipino military, the Thai military, the Korean military, the Australian military. They also did Tinian and Guam, but I didn't go to either of those. I was on the RBE, the Remain Behind element, for those deployments. But yeah, so I went to the Philippines. I went to Thailand twice. I've been to Korea 4 or 5 times. I've been to Australia once. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. Like I said before, I have a pretty insane story about the Philippines, and just because it's a funny story-ish, and this is my first military exercise in the military. That's redundant. My first exercise in the military was in the Philippines. I checked into my unit mid-September 2010 after completing the schoolhouse. And so we go on this operation called Fiblex 2010, and within 48 hours of liberty, my entire communications platoon was on restriction. We have radio guys, phone guys, maintainers, radio, computer, phone, and maintainers, and then everyone E3 and below, all the junior Marines were on restriction after about 48 hours. So we were operating 24 on, 24 off for the entire month we were there. And so there were 2 24-hour shifts. And I remember the first one goes out, and I'm in the first group, and we went to this place called the Bunny Ranch or something like that.
This is before you got on restriction?
Yeah, this is leading up to restriction.
Oh, okay, go.
Yeah, so we went to this place called the Bunny Ranch, and I'm from the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, so I don't really understand where we're at. I just see like a bar, and there's all these like Filipino girls that are, in their underwear on stage, and they'll have numbers on them, and they're all wearing numbers, and I don't know what that means because I've never been anywhere before, at least not outside the United States. I'd only been in Japan for about a week and a half. And I remember we were sitting there, and like I remember I'm like, very serious, like very like, hard junior Marine, like meritorious Lance Corporal. I'm like, oh, I gotta keep an eye on these guys, and I'm very serious, like way more than I should be. But at the same time, like I'm sitting there at the table, like keeping an eye on everything, like all gung ho moto. and everyone else, you know, they'd been in the unit for some time. And they're all just shit faced, like talking to girls or whatever. And I remember sitting there at the end of the table, like this, very like serious. And this girl came up to me, or like the mama-san of the place comes up to me, and she's like, which girl do you like? And I was like, oh, I'm okay. She's like, you want something to drink? I was like, no, I'm okay. And I was like, just water's fine. And she kept trying to talk to me, and then kept trying to introduce me to girls on the stage. I was like, oh, I'm okay. And she's like, are you gay? She's like, we have boys. And I was like, no, I'm not gay. I was like, no, I'm not gay. I'm okay. I was like, I'm good. Yeah. And I was like, I'm good. And I remember she came up behind me and tried to give me a massage, and it was the most unpleasant massage I've ever had in my entire life. Like, I remember it just hurt. I was just like, dude, please stop touching me. And so I was like, no, stop touching me. And then I didn't realize that it was I'm gonna mess this thing up, but I didn't realize that it was like a, you know, buy me, drink me bar kind of thing, where, you know, those girls, they're like, you pay to take them home at the end of the night. And I was just like, again, I was like oblivious to this fact until later on. And I remember, I remember sitting there, and like, there was a guy to my left, not to talk shit about one of my buddies, but his name was Christian Saucer, and he had like this dude had like massive biceps, like one of those dudes that mostly just worked out his arms, and this girl was like hanging out on his arms, and the girl like leans over to me, and she goes like this, and it's like, hee hee. And I joined the Marine Corps at like 120 pounds. I got at 196. So I was pretty malnourished before I joined, because, you know, how I grew up. And the Marine Corps put some weight on me. But I remember sitting there, and she was like making fun of my small arms. And I was like, well, I pointed at him. I was like, yeah, well, he's fat. And I was, you know, very, very ripped, because I didn't have any body fat on me at the time. And I remember the girl like lifts up my shirt, and I clearly have abs because I'm so tiny, but. And I remember every girl on stage like runs to the end of the stage, and they're like looking over, and they're like, oh, you know, like trying to like feed my ego, trying to like, you know, get my attention. And then I swear to God, like every girl off stage like runs up to me, and they're like all grabbing me, and I'm like trying to push them off. And the mama son's like, are you sure you're not gay? And I'm like, I'm not gay. Like I was like, please just leave me alone. I was like, I just want to sit here, because they were supposed to have one sober Marine in every group. I was like, I want to sit here, not drink, and go home at the end of the night. And so like finally. We leave, finally get going, and I remember this is the point where I realized like kind of what was happening, because each of them, everybody in my Liberty group except for my buddy Vega and one other person, brought girls back with them in the van to get on the base. We were staying in these villas on Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and they're all bringing girls back with them. And then I remember this one of the females I brought back was like crying in the van because she was super drunk and then passed out. And then so communications platoon was split into two villas, and we were staying in one. I was staying in one. It was like the radio and the phone guys, and then the computer guys were in the other one, right? So I go back, and me and Vega, we're like done for the night. We're like racking out. We're gonna go to bed, and we only had one guy in our villa. I brought a girl back. It was my buddy Schroeder. And he went, there was like 2 or 3 like nice rooms, and there was a broom closet. I think he was the most junior guy, so he got a broom closet. So he basically lost his virginity in a broom closet on a spring mattress, like about that much room. Some girl in the Philippines, and Vega decided to drink once we got back. So we're just like banging on the door, and we're like, yeah, Schroeder, you're a man now. And so like everything's fun, we're like having a good time, like joking around. I'm like back, I'm settled down, I'm chilling, and I'm like, all right, I'm fine now. And I go to bed, and I think that's it. And then, well, technically, I think it was like 2 a.m. Schroeder bangs on my door. He's like, Sales, what the fuck do you want, Schroeder? He's like, do you have a condom? I think mine broke. I was like, no, I don't have a fucking condom. I was like, go ask Vega or go ask somebody else. And so he like goes, and I don't see anything of him. And I'm like, all right, that's the end of it. And so anyway, so I'm like, oh, that's the end of it. Everyone had fun. Good night. We'll go wake up in the morning, go to work, and that's it. I get woken up at fucking 5 in the morning, 05, 05:30, 06, and they're like, everyone get in formation right now. Like everyone in formation outside. Wow. So we all get in formation, and we go over there, and again, it's 24 on, 24 off. So like literally every E3 and below that's on my shift is in our Liberty group, but we're in 2 separate villas. So what happened was in the other villa where we weren't at, there was one person in their villa that wasn't a communications Marine. He was a MMO. He was an admin guy. And he was very, very religious. He's a Mormon guy. I forgot what his name is. I want to say June or something like that. But basically all the computer guys are in there, and then one MMO guy. And all the computer guys are having sex with Filipino women, not in their rooms, but like literally all over the house, like publicly for everyone to see. They're having like a borderline orgy in this villa, and I'm dead asleep in the other villa, like I'm passed out, and we woken up at 05, and so that guy, he was clearly offended, and he went and reported to the staff duty on base, and it got brought up to higher ups, and everybody in that group, everybody that was associated that went out with those people, anybody that went out that night got put on restriction for the rest of the month. We got threatened with non-judicial punishment and loss of rank, which thankfully never happened because I didn't do anything. I was just there. And again, this is literally a week and a half into being into my first duty station.
Damn.
And then, but it gets better. The next story is a little bit shorter because I wasn't there. But so that's the first 24-hour shift, and literally the next day, the other 24-hour shift of E3 and below, they go out. There was a Marine in the group who got caught underage drinking, and the short patrol. They had short patrol in the Philippines, and there was a first sergeant on duty that asked to see this Marine's ID because he was underage, and it was a first sergeant, and so basically this private first class flips off the first sergeant and says, "Go fuck yourself," and then runs off. And then, as fate would have it, another guy in their Liberty group got his hand, I don't know the exact details, but he got his hand like stuck in like a bike chain or some kind of like motorized like bike chain or something like that, and he had to go to the hospital out in town in the Philippines. So they had to call the Marines on base. And who shows up to the hospital but the first sergeant on short patrol? And he sees this Marine that just told him to go fuck himself. So between the incident of that guy, getting injured out in town, and that guy underage drinking and, disrespecting a staff non-commissioned officer, everybody in that group was put on restriction. So literally within 48 hours of me being in the Philippines, the entire shop was on restriction, and we weren't allowed to do anything but go to the gym for the rest of the month.
Wow.
And luckily I didn't lose rank. I think the Marine that underage drank did. I can't be for sure, but everybody else, we got, I think we had like page 11s or something, or we got some kind of negative paperwork, and that was it. But that was my first field exercise in the Marine Corps.
Talk to me about what it was like for you transitioning out of the Marines.
Oh, that's a whole other beast. So transitioning out of the military was one of the weirdest and most complicated experiences in my life because, your mindset is a certain way. So I was in for 8 years, and, I'm used to to answer your question earlier, I got out of the E5, I got out as a sergeant. I'd been a sergeant for almost 4 years, and I was in zone for staff, but then I wasn't, and then I was, and then I was, and it was like a back and forth thing because my MOS, my job didn't promote, and they were on the verge of like merging everything together. And so I was like, well, do I stay in or do I get out? And again, I got all the certifications, so I could get out, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be a cinch. I got this certification, and I got this certification, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be a cinch. I'm gonna have job offers, everything's gonna be fine. And when I got out, what I found out was like that's only good for so much. To do like certain jobs, it's like you have to meet like very specific requirements and this, that, and the other. And so I did are you familiar with SkillBridge?
No.
So SkillBridge is like this program in the military where they offer like different courses and stuff that you can do as like transitionary things when you get out of the military. So basically for the last 16 weeks of my military service, I was in this program called MSSA, which is Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, and I learned Microsoft Server and Cloud Administration for 16 weeks. You're enrolled in school full time. Every morning we would go over the technical stuff about server and cloud administration, and then in the afternoon they would have a representative from Microsoft that would teach us resume writing, interview skills, like practical stuff like that. And in the program, you're guaranteed at least a first round interview with Microsoft, regardless of whether or not they have a position for you available or not. And so I did that for like 16 weeks, and I was like, oh man, I'm like, this is gonna set me up. Everything's gonna be cake after this. And it was honestly a nightmare. Like being in that program, no one had told me about like, because I was in this program and then I was out. There was no one helped me like anything else. There was no like help checking out. There was no advice for like filing, your VA claims or disability or like school or anything else. Like everything I did, I had to like figure out by myself. And like the program was cool. It was cool when I got some certifications out of it, and I met some cool people and I learned a lot of valuable like professional information. But at the end of it, I was just kind of like, all right, well now what? Like I didn't check out, I didn't have any involvement with my unit anymore. Like they kind of like I'm over here, like I'm basically out. They didn't like, whatever happens now, you're on your own. And so it was like one day I was wearing camis. The next day I'm wearing clothes, civilian clothes for 16 weeks. And then the next day I'm a civilian, and that was kind of it. And I remember getting out and I was like, oh, now what? The transitionary thing helped me like to an extent. Like I was very well adjusted thanks to that transitionary period from like the 16 weeks. But even still, before that, and then the Marine Corps specifically, as you know, is a lot of yelling, a lot of very like loud verbal and very like
instant willingness and obedience.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, it doesn't apply on the outside world. Like I'm used to like, if someone doesn't listen, there's actions you can take to do that or whatever. And also I got promoted really fast in the military, so because like the meritorious promotion in the schoolhouse and everything else, I was I was a corporal by like 1 year 1 month, and then I got out as a sergeant, and I'd been in for 8 years. So basically 7 of the 8 years I was in a leadership position. So I'm used to like delegating and doing all this stuff, and now I'm working in IT, and I'm working as like an average Joe in like a team. I'm not in like a supervisor role. I'm not in like a leadership role. I'm programming stuff and configuring things, and it took me a while to get used to that. I started working as a network operations specialist on Camp Pendleton for like a year, and I got teased with like a leader, like a supervisor role, like a couple of times because no offense to the team, but I was doing more than the rest of them, like to the point where I remember I actually got called out in an email once, and they were like, why is Zach's number so much higher than everybody else? Like there was 1 month where it was like April, and they're like, I was gone the last week for my niece's birthday, and it was like, this person did 50 tickets, this person processed 40, and it was like, Zach did 126. And they're like, all right, we're gonna give you the senior role. And I go talk to I remember going upstairs, I was like, hey, I'm here to talk to you about promotion. And the guy was like, why the fuck are you in my office? And I was like, oh, okay, bye. And yeah, that was that. And after that, I just kind of gave up on being in like those kinds of roles. And I worked in that position for a year until I got into my current role. It was a lot of trying to like figure myself out and figure out what I was doing. So there was a good amount of time where I would just go to school full time just to get the housing allowance, and I wouldn't do anything else. Like I would get my housing allowance, and that was how I survived for like a good 9 months after my first contract, and then just from there trying to like figure it out. But the adjustment point, this is kind of like an obscure thing, but there was like one point specifically where I remember like thinking like, dude, this fucking sucks, like trying to like behave the same way. And I'm kind of glad that I don't, because I remember people telling me that like, dude, you're like a completely different person than you were when you're in the military. Like people that knew me when I was in the military, like they'll tell you that I was an asshole, that I was like narcissistic, egocentric, and I was just like, I mean, I was a good leader. I love mentoring Marines and all that stuff, but I wasn't a good person. And I remember, this is an obscure example, but I remember like the whole like leadership thing. Like I remember we were going to go skate with my friends one time, and I remember like everyone was trying to like figure out like what they wanted to do. Like, oh, we're going to go to this spot, or we're going to go here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And I remember like, and I was just like, nobody could figure it out. And I was like, and so I was like, all right, this is what we're going to do. I was like, we're going to go here, then we're going to do this, and we're going to go here, and we're going to do this. Like that solves all of our problems. And these are civilians like that I just knew, and they're like, no, I don't want to do that, or no, I don't want to do that. And I was just like, well, then, like, nobody had a plan. Nobody would like come together, and it was like, you know, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, kind of thing. I was just like, I was trying to like help my friends, like using like leadership skills, and civilians aren't, you know, veterans, and like, you know, when we put a plan together, we have, you know, like a reasoning behind it and like everything. And I remember trying to apply that. I was like, oh, I could apply. I was like, I could apply that to this scenario. And I remember doing that, and everyone was just like, fuck you. Who do you think you are? And I was just like, all right, my bad.
You run a veteran organization, right?
Yeah. So I run the first, I'm going to call it, so the first and original social media platform, and it has recently become a brand for active duty and veteran skateboarders. So just to like clarify, it's not like a nonprofit like our friends at 6 Feet Above. It's more geared towards like sharing content and highlighting people that served in the military and or serving in the military that skateboard, who love skateboarding. And we have a website at militaryskate.com where we sell apparel, and we do events. And when I say we, I mean me. But I've done a Veterans Day event every year since 2018. The first year we did it at the barracks. The second year we did it at Trans World Skate Park. They are, the barracks is like the most exclusive skate park in the world. Trans World used to have a skateboarding magazine. We actually have a video on their website, which is pretty cool. And then 2020, COVID hit, so we just had an outdoor contest in Oceanside. And then last year we had another event at the barracks again. So like I said, that barracks, it's BERRICS, not the military version of the barracks. It's an indoor skate park in LA. And if you go there, on the front of the door, it says you have to be invited. It says like invite only, like you cannot skate here without an invite, and it's very hard to get in. And so I remember I was like, well, how do I get in? What do I have going for me? And I was like, I know they do ladies skating nights every so often. They have like an annual women's night session. And so I was like, well, what if we have a Veterans Day session every year? And so I reached out to everybody that worked there, and they were down, and we did an event the first year in 2018, and a whopping 5 people showed up. And one dude had a gash in his leg like this deep and had it wrapped up, and another guy had food poisoning and puking in the trash can the whole time. And so that was how official military skate started. And it kind of just grew into this wild beast where, and again, it's not like anything, you know, crazy, but I have like 7,000 followers, something like that now. And so it's a brand thing, but also I want to do something with it. I just started sponsoring people for the brand. I sent out some stuff, and I'm starting a team where with at least like one rep from each branch, and then moving forward, I had a call this past week on another passion project that I've been working on. That's something I always thought about when I was in the military is, you know, you have these people that join the military and get scholarships, or I'm sure you know there are people that join the military and they are, you know, TAD, they're temporary assigned duty on like the boxing team or like the wrestling team the entire time. And now that skateboarding is an Olympic sport, I was just like, dude, there's something here where like skateboarding could be a competitive sport in the armed forces. There's not a lot of budget for it right now because the military budget's always, you know, tight. But like, I reached out to the director of sports for the entire armed forces, and I was like, hey, I think there's something here. Would you be down to work with me? And he was just like, well, you have to do this, this, and this. You have to, like, there's a couple of different routes you can go, and it's trying to like fine tune them and figure it all out right now. And so he put me in touch, and he's like, here's the information for each armed forces. He's like, basically you have to create some kind of intramural event where there's at least 3 branches involved, or there's like other ways to go about it, but there needs to be some kind of like something established. And so I've been, I had a phone call earlier this week with the director of sports for the United States Air Force, and he was talking about how he used to do contests in Korea. And so he is like super down to like help us out and like kind of like push this thing and kind of get the ball rolling so that, you know, someday skateboarding can be an established armed forces sport. And that's something that I started working on a little while ago with the help of a couple other people.
Nice. All right, man, we're going to wrap it up. Any last words before we cut the tape?
Sure. Shameless plug, go to militaryskate.com, buy some merchandise. But more importantly, go to 6feetabove.org. It is a veteran nonprofit that's mission is to shred the trend of veteran suicide through the power of skateboarding and other things. Even if you've never stepped foot on a skateboard, or if you're a professional, if you're active duty or a veteran, hit them up. They do retreats. If you are suffering from mental health, issues, reach out and seek help. They have some good tools there. Skateboarding has been like extremely therapeutic for me and all the mental health issues that I've struggled with during my time in the service and getting out. And the people there are just fucking rad, amazing human beings. You can donate there if you or somebody you know is down for the cause. And if you are suffering and you are interested, the thing's paid for. Like airfare's paid for, food's paid for, Airbnb, like everything's paid for. There are limited spots, of course, and it's not like a vacation. It's for people that want to work on their mental health. So if you are suffering from mental health, go to 6 feet above. Go to 6 feet above, spelled out SIXFEETABOVE.org, and hit them up. And I love those dudes. I love what they're doing. Like I said, Official Military Skate isn't a nonprofit, but those are my very close friends, and we love working together and making shit happen. So check on your friends, tell them you love them, and take care of yourself.
Thanks for being here, Zach. Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Push it to the limit, I can't go no more.